27 years ago, an entire class vanished until a desperate mother noticed a crucial detail. It had been 27 years, but the scars were fresh every time the calendar marked September 28th. Willow Creek, a quiet suburban town in Oregon, wore a somber look that day. Neat lawns lined the streets, American flags fluttered gently, and the local diner served its regulars who exchanged restrained glances, each of them knowing the anniversary no one could ever forget. In 1996, an entire fifth grade class from Willow Creek Elementary vanished during a routine school trip to Crater Lake, a disappearance so complete that not a single body or clue was ever found. The children, 15 in total, and their teacher, Mr. Gregory, left on a yellow school bus and never returned. The case paralyzed the town and baffled law enforcement across Oregon and beyond. And yet, it would take nearly 3 decades and the careful eye of one grieving mother to notice a single overlooked detail, a photograph that could unravel everything. Laura Calloway sat at her dining table, the morning sunlight casting long streaks across the wood grain, highlighting the worn edges of a photo album she hadn't touched in years. It was September 28th, 2023, exactly 27 years since her daughter Rory Calloway boarded that ill-fated trip. She reached for the cup of coffee that had long gone cold and pulled the photo album closer. The image that caught her attention was a group photo, a typical pre-trip picture taken in front of the Willow Creek Elementary yellow school bus. 15 children, bright-eyed and smiling, stood with Mr. Gregory. But what struck Laura now, after all these years, was a detail no one else had mentioned. Standing slightly apart from the group, almost blending into the background, was Principal Lillian Brooks. Lillian Brooks was a figure that had become almost ghostly in town lore. Respected at the time, her career ended abruptly following the disappearance, though no charges had ever been filed against her. She had taken an early retirement and faded quietly from public view. Official reports from 1996 stated she had not accompanied the class on that trip. Laura knew this because she had attended the very parent meeting where that fact was reiterated by police investigators. But here she was, clearly in the photograph. Laura's hands trembled as she stared at the grainy image, the unmistakable silhouette of the principal lingering in the corner near the bus door. The timestamp printed on the photo, September 28, 1996, 7:15 a.m., made it clear it was taken moments before departure. Laura's heart pounded. Could it have been a farewell gesture? Why had this detail never surfaced in police reports or town discussions? Why did Laura herself overlook it until now? Memories flooded back, the endless interviews, the cold comfort from investigators who cited a lack of evidence, the blame cast on Mr. Gregory, who was presumed to have led the class astray or worse. Laura Calloway was now 64 years old. She had endured the loss of her husband to cancer, retired from her long career as a librarian, and outlived many of the other parents who had also lost their children that day. Her closest confidant, Helen Carter, whose daughter Sally was among the vanished, remained her only true ally. By noon, Laura could no longer sit still. She gathered the photo and placed it carefully in a plastic sleeve. Before heading out, she called Helen. "Helen, do you have a minute? There's something about that trip, about Lillian Brooks. I need to show you something." Helen's voice, soft but weighted with shared grief, replied, "Come by. The kettle's on." The two women lived just blocks apart in a neighborhood largely unchanged over the decades. White picket fences, vintage mailboxes, and old oak trees lined the streets, a snapshot of small-town America. But beneath its quaint facade was a community still haunted by unanswered questions. At Helen's kitchen table, amidst the comforting scent of Earl Grey and lavender, Laura laid the photo flat. Helen leaned in, adjusting her reading glasses. "Oh," Helen whispered. Is that Principal Brooks?" Laura nodded. "Why is she there?" "We were told it was Mr. Gregory and a support staff member. That was in the official report. We all believed it." Helen exhaled slowly. Maybe she was just seeing them off. "But why did no one mention it?" Laura countered. "Not even once, not in 27 years. The two women fell into silence, the weight of this small but potent detail pressing down on them. The photo felt like a fracture in the accepted narrative. Helen finally spoke. "Laura, don't let this consume you again. We've been down this road so many times chasing leads that went nowhere. It nearly broke you before." Laura knew Helen was right, but something about this felt different. If the principal had indeed been there that morning, what else had the town forgotten or overlooked? And what if Principal Brooks herself had known more than she ever admitted? As the day wore on, Laura found herself standing outside a familiar house, a modest craftsman bungalow with ivy climbing the brick facade, the house that once belonged to Principal Lillian Brooks. Her car was in the driveway. Laura hesitated for a moment before stepping forward and knocking. The door opened almost immediately, and standing there, older but unmistakable, was Lillian Brooks herself. Her face paled when she saw Laura. "Laura Calloway," she said slowly. "What brings you here after all this time?" Laura held up the photograph. "I have questions, Lillian. Questions I should have asked a long time ago." The air between them was taut, a mixture of history, suspicion, and the shadow of tragedy. Inside the house, Laura caught sight of another woman, younger, perhaps in her 30s, who quickly disappeared into a back room at the sight of Laura. Who was she? Why did Lillian look so rattled? Laura stepped forward, her voice steady but resolute. "I need to know the truth about that day. I need to know what really happened on September 28th, 1996. Lillian hesitated, gripping the doorframe tightly. "This isn't a good time," she whispered, her composure clearly cracking. But Laura refused to be dismissed. As the wind rustled the American flag in the yard and the sun dipped behind clouds, Laura made a silent vow. This time she would not walk away until she knew everything. Lillian Brooks stepped aside, reluctantly allowing Laura into the dim foyer of her home. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and something else, perhaps lavender, but beneath it lingered a heaviness as if the walls themselves remembered. The younger woman who had vanished into the back room did not return. "Sit, if you want," Lillian offered without warmth, motioning to an armchair in her living room. Laura sat gingerly, clutching the photo in her hands. "I looked at this picture today." Laura began, her voice measured, "and it struck me you were there that morning. But for 27 years, no one ever said you went on that trip." Lillian didn't respond right away. Instead, she poured herself a glass of water, her hands shaking slightly. The clink of ice echoed loudly in the quiet room. "I wasn't on that bus, Laura," she said, finally sitting across from her. "I saw them off in the parking lot, that's all. But you were close enough to be in the picture," Laura pressed. Why has no one ever mentioned that Lillian's gaze faltered for a moment before she regained her composure? Grief plays tricks on memory. You know that. Outside, the American flag in the yard rippled in a stiffening breeze. The living room was filled with relics of a carefully curated life. Framed diplomas, neatly stacked books, a fading portrait of a woman who looked like Lillian, but younger, happier. Laura leaned forward. "Who was that woman who left when I arrived?" "Is she family?" Lillian hesitated, her lips parting as if to answer, then closed again. "A friend. She's just visiting." Laura's instinct screamed otherwise. "Lillian, please," Laura pleaded. "You knew our children. You led that school. Did Mr. Gregory ever raise concerns? Did anything seem off that day?" Lillian's eyes glistened, but she did not cry. "You know the investigation went over every detail. The police questioned me for hours. I've answered all these questions before." Laura's frustration built. "But not this one. Why were you in that picture?" Lillian stood abruptly. "I think you should go." Laura rose slowly, meeting her gaze. "I will, but I need you to know I'm reopening this. I've already contacted Officer Jensen. He's still in Willow Creek. If there's anything left unsaid, it's time to say it." At the mention of the officer's name, a flicker of something crossed Lillian's face, fear, regret. Laura couldn't be sure. "I wish you peace," Lillian whispered, her voice barely audible. She opened the front door. Stepping out into the afternoon light, Laura felt the crisp autumn air hit her skin, bracing and sharp. She walked to the corner and paused, glancing back. Through a slit in the curtains, she saw Lillian watching. When Laura returned home, she placed the photograph carefully on her dining table next to her cold coffee. She sat in silence for a long time, her mind whirring. That evening, she called Officer Jensen. "I found something strange," she told him. "Can you meet tomorrow, Laura?" "It's been a long time," Jensen said cautiously. "Are you sure you want to dig this up again?" "Yes," Laura answered firmly. "I'm sure." As she hung up, her eyes drifted back to the photo. The unanswered question gnawed at her. If Lillian Brooks hadn't gone on that trip, why did it look like she was still hiding something? And who was that woman at her house? Laura knew this was just the beginning. The next morning, Laura arrived early at Willow Creek Police Station, its brick facade looking much the same as it had in 1996. She spotted Officer Jensen standing near the entrance, a cup of coffee in hand, his gray hair and lined face a mirror of the passage of time. "Laura," he greeted her gently. "Come inside." They sat in his modest office, a framed American flag above his desk and case files stacked neatly along the shelves. Jensen listened intently as Laura explained the photograph and her encounter with Lillian Brooks. When Laura finished, Jensen rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Lillian Brooks. She disappeared from public life so quickly after the investigation went cold, but nothing in her statement back then suggested she was involved. Laura pulled out the photo, pointing to the timestamp. "She was there that morning, Jensen, and she acted strange when I visited her yesterday. There was a younger woman with her. I think she's hiding something." Jensen leaned back. "I'll pull the original files. Maybe there's something we missed, and I'll quietly check on who's living at her house now, but Laura, no promises." Laura nodded. "I understand, but we need to look." That evening, unable to shake her restlessness, Laura returned to the cemetery where Rory's gravestone stood. She laid fresh flowers, her thoughts spinning. As she lingered, she noticed movement nearby, a woman standing alone by a cluster of headstones where the other children's memorials were. Laura's breath caught. It was the same younger woman from Lillian Brooks's house. Summoning her courage, Laura approached. "Hello," she said gently. "I think we saw each other yesterday." The woman turned slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes haunted. "I remember," she said quietly. "You were at Lillian's house." "Who are you?" Laura asked, her voice calm but firm. The woman hesitated, then spoke. "My name is Audrey Whitman." The name sent chills down Laura's spine. Audrey Whitman had been one of the missing children, the classmate of Rory's presumed dead. "Audrey," Laura whispered. How are you here?" Audrey lowered her gaze. "I survived, but I couldn't come back. Lillian found me years later. She took me in, but told me it was better if no one knew." Laura felt a surge of anger and heartbreak. Why would she say that? What really happened that day? Audrey's lips trembled. "It wasn't Mr. Gregory's fault. He didn't abduct us. The trip. It was all arranged by Lillian." Laura staggered back. "You're saying Lillian planned it?" Audrey nodded, tears brimming. "We were never going to Crater Lake. The bus went somewhere else, a remote cabin, and horrible things happened." Laura felt her knees weaken. "And my Rory..." Audrey looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry, Laura. Rory didn't survive the first night." Tears streamed down Laura's cheeks as decades of unanswered questions crashed down. "Why did Lillian do this?" she asked, her voice cracking. Audrey shook her head. "I don't know everything. But she told me debts, threats, dangerous people." Laura exhaled slowly, her grief burning into resolve. "Audrey, you have to come forward. The truth matters. The other families deserve it." Audrey wiped her tears. "Lillian convinced me no one would believe me. She said I'd only cause more pain." Laura gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're here now. You can end this." For a long moment, Audrey said nothing. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll speak to the police." Laura hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of the past lift just slightly. They stood together among the gravestones, two survivors of a different kind. As the autumn wind rustled the trees overhead, Laura knew that at last they were on the path to truth. The next day, Laura accompanied Audrey to Willow Creek Police Station. Officer Jensen met them at the front desk, his usually calm demeanor tinged with curiosity and disbelief as he recognized Audrey's name. "You're saying..." "This is Audrey Whitman," he asked Laura in a low voice. Laura nodded. She's ready to tell her story. In a quiet interview room lined with faded acoustic panels and an American flag pinned in the corner, Audrey recounted the harrowing events of that day in 1996. Audrey's voice wavered, but she spoke clearly. The bus never went toward Crater Lake. Shortly after leaving town, Mr. Gregory pulled into an abandoned logging road. But he wasn't acting on his own. Lillian Brooks was already there, waiting in a second vehicle. She was directing everything. Jensen furrowed his brow. Did you see this with your own eyes, Audrey? She nodded. I was sitting near the front. She boarded the bus and told us it was a special change of plans. Mr. Gregory looked terrified. He wasn't in control. Laura listened intently, heart pounding. For decades, she and the other parents had believed Mr. Gregory had abducted their children. The pain of that narrative weighed heavy in Willow Creek's history. But now Audrey's account painted a far darker story, one where betrayal came from within their own trusted community. According to Audrey, the children were driven to a remote cabin deep in the forest near the Oregon border. Lillian coordinated their confinement, and over the next 2 days, men arrived, strangers who began taking children away one by one. Audrey had survived only because one captor took pity on her, smuggling her across state lines where she eventually escaped. Years later, after living homeless in Portland, she crossed paths with Lillian again, who offered her food, shelter, and silence. As Audrey described this in painful detail, Jensen took meticulous notes, his face growing grimmer. We always suspected Mr. Gregory, he murmured, and he vanished without a trace himself. But this suggests he was a victim too. Audrey wiped her eyes. He tried to protect us, but he couldn't stop them. When the interview concluded, Jensen stood. We need to act immediately. This could reopen the entire case. Outside the station, Laura felt equal parts relief and dread. She glanced at Audrey, whose face looked drained yet somehow lighter than before, as if sharing the truth had begun to lift the burden she had carried alone for nearly 30 years. That evening, as word spread quietly through police channels, officers moved quickly to secure a warrant. By nightfall, a small convoy of unmarked cars rolled down Willow Creek's quiet streets toward Lillian Brooks's ivy-covered bungalow. Laura, unable to stay away, stood at a respectful distance under a street lamp watching the scene unfold. The American flag in Lillian's yard fluttered softly in the evening breeze as uniformed officers approached her door. Lillian answered, a calm but pale expression on her face, as though she had expected this moment all along. Lillian Brooks, the lead officer, intoned, "We have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of conspiracy, kidnapping, and child endangerment." Lillian said nothing as she was led away in handcuffs, her eyes briefly meeting Laura's across the yard. There was no anger in her gaze, but neither was there remorse, only resignation. As the cruiser doors closed with a heavy thud, Laura felt her knees weaken. Helen Carter arrived at her side, having rushed over as soon as she heard. Helen put an arm around Laura's shoulders. "It's happening," she whispered. "We might finally get answers." But Laura's mind swirled with new questions. What had driven Lillian Brooks to this crime? Who were the men she worked with? Were any other children alive? The full truth was still out of reach, but at least now they had momentum. Late that night, Laura and Helen sat together at Laura's kitchen table, staring at the photograph that had started it all. The timestamp seemed almost like a cruel reminder, but also a clue that would not be ignored any longer. Across town, Audrey Whitman sat in protective custody at the station, writing her full statement in longhand at the officer's request. Her hands trembled as she wrote, but she didn't stop. Tomorrow would bring more revelations. But tonight, for the first time in 27 years, Willow Creek was no longer frozen in uncertainty. The following morning, Willow Creek felt different, quieter, watchful. The town's gossip circles were already abuzz as news of Lillian Brooks's arrest trickled out. At the police station, Laura sat beside Officer Jensen as Audrey, her voice soft but steady, finished signing her official statement. Across the table, Jensen leaned forward, his pen poised. "Audrey, there's something else we need to know, the identities of the men who helped Lillian." Audrey nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't know all their names, but I remember one in particular. He called himself Mason. He seemed to be in charge. He and Lillian argued often about payment, about how quickly they needed to move the children." Jensen jotted this down. "Do you know where Mason is now?" Audrey shook her head. "After I escaped, I never saw him again. Lillian never spoke of him either. But sometimes when she thought I wasn't listening, she would mention a farm near Klamath Falls." Jensen's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "We can follow up on that. You've done more than enough for now, Audrey." As Audrey was escorted to a safe house under protective custody, Jensen turned to Laura. "You should go home. We have a lot to process and investigate. I promise we'll keep you updated." But Laura couldn't rest. Back at home, Helen arrived with sandwiches and coffee sitting at Laura's kitchen table as the two women quietly absorbed the weight of what was happening. "Do you think more children survived?" Helen asked suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. Laura hesitated. "I don't know, but I have to believe we'll get answers now." Audrey's testimony changed everything. Meanwhile, at the station, Lillian Brooks sat across from two detectives in an interrogation room, her hands folded, her expression carefully blank. The walls bore no decoration now, only a digital clock ticking steadily. Lillian, one detective, began, "Audrey Whitman has come forward. She's told us everything." For a moment, Lillian said nothing. Then she sighed, her shoulders sagging. "Then you already know." "I did what I thought I had to do." The detective leaned in. Why betray the children? Why betray your community?" Lillian's gaze remained fixed on the table. Debts. Gambling debts at first, then threats. "They said they'd harm my sister if I didn't cooperate. The men Mason and his associates, they knew I could help them gain access. They promised no one would get hurt. I believed them, until it was too late." Her voice cracked as she continued. "After it all happened, I couldn't face the town. I couldn't tell the truth. And then I found Audrey years later. She was broken. I thought, by sheltering her, by taking care of her quietly, maybe I could atone." But the detectives pushed further. "Why did you remain silent all these years?" Lillian's eyes glistened. "Because I thought, if they never found out, maybe the families could heal. I was wrong." Back at Laura's house, she and Helen talked late into the evening, reliving memories of their daughters, school projects, sleepovers, summer picnics. Grief interwove with nostalgia, each memory a painful but precious reminder of all they'd lost. Just after 9 p.m., Laura's phone rang. It was Officer Jensen. "We've located the farm Audrey mentioned," he told her. "We're sending a team tomorrow morning. I promise we'll keep you informed." Laura thanked him, her heart racing again, a mix of dread and hope. As she set down the phone, she looked at Helen and whispered, "This isn't over yet." In Willow Creek, the night settled heavily, but in the air was something new possibility. Tomorrow might finally reveal what truly happened to the children of Willow Creek Elementary. At dawn, Willow Creek's police convoy moved quietly out of town. The target, a remote, overgrown farm near Klamath Falls, nearly 3 hours away, identified from Audrey's fractured memories. Laura sat anxiously at her kitchen table, the photograph of Rory and her classmates before her, waiting for news. Helen stayed close, keeping vigil in silence, their friendship the only anchor through the long morning. By noon, Laura's phone rang. It was Officer Jensen. His voice was serious but steady. "Laura, we found the property. It was abandoned long ago, but we're uncovering evidence, children's clothing, school supplies, and personal items consistent with what we believe belonged to the missing students." Laura's breath caught in her throat. "Any sign of the children?" Jensen hesitated. "No bodies yet, but forensic teams are combing through the site. We found what looks like a ledger, with names, dates, payments. The children were trafficked, Laura, sold and moved out of state almost immediately after arrival. Mason's name appears repeatedly. We have enough now to widen the investigation." Laura felt a hollow ache deepen in her chest. It wasn't a burial ground, but the grim reality was somehow worse. Her daughter had been lost into an international trafficking ring. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek. The townspeople, many now elderly, gathered at the church, quietly holding vigil as police continued their search. For the first time in decades, the fog of uncertainty began to lift, even as the truth proved harrowing. Meanwhile, at the police station, Lillian Brooks sat in her cell awaiting formal charges. Under interrogation, she provided a full confession. Mason wasn't his real name, she admitted. He was a broker for a trafficking network. He promised my debts would vanish if I cooperated, but I didn't know how far it would go until it was too late. Jensen took her statement down carefully, ensuring every detail would hold up in court. As the investigation widened, authorities coordinated with federal agencies tracing Mason's network across several states and into Mexico. Audrey's memories, incomplete but invaluable, provided leads. The ledger found at the farm corroborated names and transactions. Pieces long hidden began falling into place. That evening, Laura received another call from Jensen. "Laura, there's something else. In the basement of the farmhouse, we discovered a trunk. Inside were keepsakes, locks of hair ribbons, personal effects belonging to several of the children, including a pendant with Rory's name engraved on it." Laura wept quietly. For the first time, she had tangible proof that Rory had been there. Proof that her daughter's fate was not imagined but real and tragically stolen. In the following days, Willow Creek transformed into a community in mourning, but also a community united by newfound purpose. The church bells tolled for the children, and a memorial service was planned to finally honor them properly. Audrey remained in protective custody but agreed to testify in court. She and Laura spoke several times in the days that followed their conversations, a fragile bridge between survivor and grieving mother. "You gave us a path forward," Laura told her gently during one visit. "You gave us truth." Audrey nodded. "I was so afraid it would only cause more pain." "It did," Laura admitted, "but pain we can name is better than pain that haunts us in the dark." At Lillian Brooks's arraignment, the courtroom was packed with townspeople. Laura and Helen sat together in the front row, faces set, listening as the charges were read: conspiracy, kidnapping, human trafficking, obstruction of justice. Lillian, pale and frail, offered no plea. Her attorney requested additional time, but the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. Later that day, Laura visited Rory's grave again, laying a new bouquet of wildflowers. She sat quietly for a long time, reflecting on all that had transpired. The town's mayor approached her. "We're renaming the elementary school," he said quietly, "in memory of the children." "It's the least we can do." Laura nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you." And so Willow Creek Elementary would become the Rory Calloway Memorial School, a place where future generations would learn, laugh, and grow, even as the past was honored. As autumn gave way to winter, the investigation continued. Arrests were made across multiple states, and Mason's identity was finally confirmed. He had fled to Mexico, but was apprehended through joint efforts between U.S. and Mexican authorities. In early December, Officer Jensen visited Laura at home with an update. "We have a fuller picture now. Sadly, it confirms what Audrey told us: none of the other children survived beyond those first years, but we've dismantled the network that harmed them." Laura sat in silence, absorbing the finality of it. A chapter had truly closed. But as she looked at Rory's photograph on her mantle, framed now in brass, she whispered, "I kept my promise. I found the truth." In the months that followed, Laura and Helen became quiet leaders in Willow Creek's recovery. They organized counseling sessions for townspeople and memorial events for families. Audrey, under a new identity, was given a chance at a peaceful life at last. Though grief remained, so too did resilience. For the first time in 27 years, Laura slept soundly.